I was struck with the spirited songs and singing. And Josh told me that when we finish this study in a few minutes, he is going to sing a song, lead us in a song, that will call each of us to decide, will I be able to sing this song honestly? And if I can't sing it honestly, then maybe I need to evaluate, take a look at myself, and make whatever necessary changes need to be made. So I appreciate that sentiment. So before we have that time of self-reflection, let's have a bit of biblical reflection. Who is or what is Emmanuel? It is literally God with us. The Hebrew word tells me when I look it up that it is a combination of God, El, Emmanuel. Anything in Hebrew language that has the El intends to put God in that word. And so it is the combination of God and man, Emmanuel. So what is that? Who is that? We know who it is, but what does it signify and what does it mean? Tonight is intended to be a brief Old Testament study combined with an understanding of this word, Emmanuel. To understand this term in Matthew chapter 1, I want you to go with me to the book of Isaiah, chapter 7. If you will turn over there, we're going to do a brief historical placing of this event and put it in context so that we can understand what was happening when this prophecy was made. God made through Isaiah the prophet this prophecy about Emmanuel. It is what was read in Matthew 1, quoted here in Isaiah chapter 7 and in verse 14. But let us understand the context of the things that are happening here. If you go back to the beginning of chapter 7 in verse 1, you find that Ahaz, the king, has begun to reign. Ahaz was the king who was, shall we say, not a very good guy. He was a long line of kings who just did not follow God as he should have done. And what is about to be said had already begun to take place. 2 Kings chapter 15, the events that he is talking about here had already happened. There was already this encroachment of the army from the north coming down amongst the people of God, especially from Syria. And therefore, God is talking to Ahaz. And notice he discusses quickly, he says in verse 2, it was told to the house of David, saying, Syria's forces are deployed in Ephraim. The house of David means Judah. The Ephraim means Israel. If you recall, during the time that the kingdom split, 10 tribes went to Israel, and 2 stayed in Judah. David's household reigned over Judah, and Israel had a whole set of other kings. And Ephraim, who was given primacy when Joseph spoke to Jacob before he died in Egypt about his sons, Ephraim would have primacy, and he got it and had the name Ephraim to stand for the whole of the 10 tribes. And so what's happening is God is saying this encroachment is coming, and it had. It already started by the time Ahaz became king. And in verse 3, God told Isaiah to go out and to talk to Ahaz, and he took with him his son, Shear-Jashub, verse 3. And he said in verse 4 to Ahaz, this is what the prophet Isaiah said to Ahaz. Take heed and be quiet. Do not fear or be faint-hearted, for these, and like how God sometimes does his own rebuke of people. For these 2 stubs of smoking firebrands. That's God's way of saying they're not much. They're not much. For the fierce anger of Rezin in Syria and the son of Remaliah, because Syria in the north, Ephraim and the son of Remaliah have plotted evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and trouble it, and let us make a gap in its wall for ourselves, and set a king over them, the son of Tabel. God said, Syria wants to conquer you. And Ahaz was told by Isaiah to be ready. That's what he wants to do. He wants to conquer. Now notice verse 7. Thus says the Lord, it shall not stand, nor shall it come to pass. What they want to do is not going to happen. What they intend against you, I'm not going to let it happen. In fact, he says, look at verse 8. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be broken so that it will not be a people. There's a little bit of confusion here because Israel had already been taken off into Assyrian captivity many, many years before. And so how is it that God is now saying, many, many years later, that Ephraim, Israel, will now cease to be a people? It's a bit of a concern. Except when you realize that in 2 Kings chapter 17, God shows us, verse 24, that the fulfillment of Israel losing its place happened when foreign nations were brought in to live in that land that formerly had been Israel. And once they had been brought into that land, now they inhabited the land, and never again did the people of God ever live in Israel again. So what God was prophesying to Ahaz was that 65 years from this prophecy, what I'm telling you, Israel will then fully cease to be. They had already been removed into captivity many years before, but now the final thing will be we're going to repopulate it with heathen nations of people. And it happened 65 years from the time that God spoke to Ahaz. Then he said, verse 10, God spoke to Ahaz and said this, ask a sign for yourself from the Lord your God. Ask it either in the depth or in the height above. The Lord said to Ahaz, I have made you a promise that you're not going to be defeated in war. And I am telling you this, and I'm giving you proof of it by saying that in 65 years, the final fall of Israel will take place. But in the meantime, Ahaz, would you like to have a sign that I'm telling you the truth? How many times have you thought that and maybe even asked that of God? I mean, if you're in a situation where you just need something and God said, okay, just if you want a sign, I'll give you one so you'll know. Would you sign up? I guarantee you I'd sign up. Now, this word, a sign, it's an interesting word. It means to make an incision or to make a dent. A sign. Well, I can see that. The young man who takes the car out for the first time and brings it back, and later Dad goes out and finds there's a dent in the car. Son, did you have a problem with the car? No. Nothing happened? No. Well, tell me about this sign. Tell me about this dent. Okay, right? That's what this is. It is a way of saying, all right, I'm going to put a mark right here, and it says this is going to happen. You can do whatever you want. Ask whatever you want. Maybe he could have asked for a sign that was immediate, just like God gave Moses. God said, Moses, you're going to take my people out of Egypt. I can't do it. I'm not able. I can't speak. I can't do. God said, and he said, I can't even talk to this Pharaoh guy. God said, you have a rod in your hand, a staff, don't you? Yeah. Throw it down. Boom. Became a snake. He said, now pick it up. He picked it up, became a staff. God said, now Moses, take your hand and put it inside your coat. Now pull it out. Full of leprosy. Now put it back real quick. Okay. Pull it out. Clean. Ahaz could have said, God, let me throw this stick on the ground. Let me put my hand in my coat. Ahaz could have said, well, now there's the kind of a sign in the Bible that happens where it's future and it happens for a long time, but it teaches a lesson. In Isaiah 20, you know what happened to Isaiah? God said, Isaiah, take off your sackcloth and take off your shoes and walk around naked for 3 years. It was a sign, a living sign right there that something was going on. He could have done that. Or maybe he could have done what he did with Moses in Exodus. When he looked at Moses and he said, now, listen, there's going to come a day. Because, see, Moses is out there. You recall where he was called when he went, before he was taken to Egypt to get the people out? Where was he? He was out in the wilderness. You know where he was? Mount Sinai. That's where he was. And so God said, one day, Moses, when you lead my people back to this mountain, then you will know. Now, that's the kind of sign that's not real obvious. It's just sort of natural. He's going to lead them out, and they're going to end up at this mountain, and then you're going to go, ooh, God did that. Think of Ahaz could have asked for any sign he wanted. Hezekiah did. It's recorded in Isaiah 38. But it's also in 2 Kings 20 because that shows us how Isaiah fits into the record of the kings. God sent the prophet and said, you're going to die. Hezekiah began to cry, basically, and he said, Lord, I'm not ready. I'd like more time. God said, fine. I give you 15 more years. Hezekiah said, well, can you give me a sign that this is going to happen? God said, sure. Take the sundial. You want it to go forward 10 degrees or backward 10 degrees? Hezekiah asked for a sign. God gave it to him. Ahaz had a chance. But Ahaz said, verse 12, I will not ask, nor will I test the Lord. This really is a statement of false humility. This is Ahaz saying, oh, you're not going to trick me with that, Lord. You're so much greater than I am. I'm not going to ask you for a sign. That's not how he should have responded, because look at verse 13. Hear now, O house of David. House of David, he is in the lineage, Judah. Hear now, house of David, is it a small thing for you to weary men, but will you weary my God also? It was wearisome because you could ask for a sign, and yet you're acting like you're being so humble not to, when Ahaz, you are the least humble person around right now. You're leading the people away from God. So don't try to feign that you're some faithful kind of guy. Ahaz had a chance to have a sign. He turned it down, so God said, fine, I'll give you one. And the key is this: God gave his own sign in his own time. And he said, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. You didn't ask for a sign? I'm going to give you my own. There's been a lot of consideration about this verse. A lot of writing that says the sign was a reference to a child born during the time of Ahaz, so as to be the sign proving what God wanted. And so I suppose that some think this is necessary, because after all, if Ahaz didn't see it, how was it a sign to him? Remember, he had a chance to have a sign, and he turned it down. He had a chance to get one immediately in front of him, and he turned it down. So God said, I'll do my own, and it'll be a sign. You won't get to see it, but it will be a sign, so that in generations to come, when people look back, they will go, there's the sign, right there. God did it. And I remind you, well, that would assume that you would remember the first time I told you about it. So I won't remind you necessarily. I will tell it again as though we've never heard it. A number of years ago, I did schooling in Lexington in a graduate program, Lexington Theological Seminary, which no longer exists, by the way. Had a professor. We were studying Isaiah 7 and 14. And he was making the claim that it was something that happened in the lifetime of Ahaz. And number two, he said, and you know, when Matthew quotes it over here in Matthew 1, he made a mistake. Well, he said not so much a mistake, he invented it. Because see, Matthew was writing to a Jewish audience, and he wanted them to believe that this Messiah, Jesus, really was prophesied from of old. So he took a prophecy that God made to Ahaz and fulfilled it somewhere in his time, though there's no record, he said, about that, and applied it over here so that everybody would go, whoa, that's pretty cool about God. So Matthew was wrong. That's what he said. I raised my hand. And I said, sir, are you telling me that right now I either have to accept what Matthew said or what you said? That's what I'm telling you. Okay, I'll take Matthew. And everybody goes, oh. No big stretch. I'm not going to throw rocks or anything like that. I wasn't afraid. But that's the gall of somebody to stand up and say Matthew was wrong. This is God's sign. Now, what is the purpose of the sign? What's going on? Let me give you these ideas. Turn to Hebrews chapter 2. Let me begin reading in verse 14. Hebrews 2, verse 14. Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same. Listen to this terminology of mutual. That through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. For indeed he does not give aid to angels, but he does give aid to the seed of Abraham. Therefore in all things, notice the terminology, therefore in all things he had to be made like his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For in that he himself has suffered being tempted, he is able to aid those who are tempted. Look at chapter 4, verse 14. Seeing then that we have a great high priest who's passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted, like as we are, yet without sin. Therefore let us come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Chapter 5, verse 8, though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things that he suffered. Jesus is Emmanuel. He had to be made like us so that he could empathize with us. In other words, Emmanuel means on my level. He came to my level so he could understand me. And number two, so that I boldly could go to him. Number 2, Colossians chapter 1. Look at the one phrase at the end of verse 27. Colossians 1:27. The glory of this mystery among the Gentiles, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Not only does Emmanuel mean on my level, it also means in our lives. In our lives. So that we can have a relationship with him. That's Emmanuel. How can we know God, the transcendent God, if he doesn't come here? And how can I have a relationship with him if I don't have him in me? You see, that's what's going on. Emmanuel, he's on my level and he's in my life. Now finally, third, 1 John chapter 2, verse 1. My little children, these things I write to you so that you may not sin. And if anyone sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous. He is Emmanuel because he is at my side to aid me. That's what Emmanuel is. On my level, in my life, and at my side. I love this word advocate. You know what the word advocate is here? It's the same word used about the Holy Spirit. When Jesus told the disciples, I'm going to go away and I'm going to send my Parakletos, the one who will walk beside you. That's what it means. He is my advocate. The literal understanding of this is when the devil calls me to his court to condemn me. Jesus walks beside me to say, not condemned. He's on my side. Emmanuel, God with us. On my level, in my life, and by my side. I hope that is what he is with you. And now, we all have the chance for the self-reflection to sing this song about going to heaven. Is it a thing? Do you expect to be in heaven when we all get there? Do you expect it? If you do, you can sing this song with the kind of fervor and expectation that we sang the others. If you don't, then you can't sing at all comfortably if your relationship with the Lord is not as it should be. Let us help you get it there if we can help you while we stand and sing together.